English for teaching purposes. Comparing and contrasting.
When we need to put things into perspective, we use comparison and contrast. Comparison and contrast enable us to evaluate the differences and similarities between people, things, events, phenomena. There is no comparison-reluctant field. As long as we can measure, appreciate, count, or dimension something, we can compare it to something else. Let's start by taking a look at the easiest comparative structure, at least grammatically speaking. Let's see what we say when we mean that two things are the same. Well, one decent option in this case is to skip the whole comparative structure and use the expression the same as. X is the same as Y. And now, a comparative structure that I'm sure you have seen in your English books since the beginning of time. This structure is like an adjective or an adverb sandwiched between adverb as and adverb as. Pretty easy. X is as counterproductive as Y. You should solve Q as imaginatively as you solved R. If you wish to compare the quantities of something you might be measuring, you just sandwich a noun between the adverbs, but add an extra layer, much or many. X can produce as much waste as Y. X has as many advantages as Y. In the first example, the word waste is uncountable, so we add much between the first adverb and the noun. In the second example, we add many because advantage is a countable noun. In fact, we use its plural form. Making these sentences negative is interesting and elegant. Instead of using a sentence as ambiguous and pointless as X is different from Y in size and price, you can build the much more interesting X is not as expensive and large as Y. But if you want to make these sandwiched comparatives even more interesting, try using words that add some variation to the degree as to which what is being compared is the same. X is nearly as useful as Y. Make it even more interesting. Make this one negative and you will increase the difference. X is not nearly as useful as Y. Other expressions you can use to add interest and meaning to this comparative are almost, approximately, nearly, essentially, exactly. The traditional complete structure of a comparative statement should have the following elements. Item X, a comparative short word, than, item Y, or item X, more, long word, than, and item Y. X is smarter than Y. X is more elegant than Y. Let's make these statements more interesting by adding qualifying words to intensify the comparison. Slightly, considerably, clearly, definitely, and far. Sometimes you'll want to express that something doubles, triplicates the quality of something else. X is twice more surprising than Y. What if we decide to focus our attention on the inferiority of one of those items? In that case, adjectives and adverbs will be preceded by less. Do question 3 first. It's less complicated. We can also use this kind of comparative using full structures, as in X is less ambivalent than Y. We are now going to watch Giorgetta Ion from the School of Education of the UAB use this comparative structure.
Or for example, if our students are sharing the same laptop in group, it's also better. Why? Why do you think it's better to share the same laptop instead of use 3 or 4 laptops in the same group? What do you think? To interact and to avoid the use of Facebook or social networks and so on, because if they are using the same computer, it's maybe less tempting. Exactly. Thank you.
Now that we know how to make simple comparatives more interesting, we can do things like expressing that 2 items vary at the same time. To do that, we use 2 comparatives headed by the. The slower X goes, the easier it is to follow it. The more interesting X gets, the less interested Y is. We'll watch Giorgetta again using the combination of comparatives just mentioned.
And here we have some ideas on how to improve the work, the group work. What they propose, for example, they propose that the more intentional you are, the better student group will function, which means that, for example, we have to provide students with all the resources and teach them how to improve their work in group. They have to know how to do it, they have to have some roles and responsibilities, and we have to provide them the resources in order to achieve this.
Superlatives are great in that they compare one item to the rest of their kind. What you do need to remember is that superlatives require the use of article the. X is the most capable student in the team. X is the shortest path to Mordor. The good news is that their structure is simple. I'm sure after applying these few tricks, your comparatives will flow gracefully and you will feel more self-confident when using them in class. See you next time!